I think most of you know me by now. I'm the executive director of the State Public Charter School Authority. And today we are doing our good governance training, which is part of our governance series. We already had the OML training, open meeting law training, and now we're going to get into good governance because good governance really extends beyond just open meeting law. We are asking that each of you have a means to take notes during this meeting. You will more than likely hear things during this meeting that you realize your board is not doing or that did not happen when you joined the board. So make a list of those things, then go back to your board chair and school leader and start prioritizing next steps. Our outcomes today for our agenda is that we are going to talk about why does good governance matter. We're going to talk about AB 419 from the 2021 session, and then we are going to go over the State Public Charter School Authority's good governance standards. Why governance matters. I am actually going to read this out loud to you because I think it is really poignant. If you've seen a charter school that was clearly advancing on its mission and increasing academic achievement, you can be certain that a high-performing board is hard at work. If you've seen a charter school failing to achieve its goals, chances are an underperforming board is behind the scenes. There is an irrefutable connection between the effectiveness of a charter school board and a successful school. So any school that you're thinking of in your head that you view as a successful school, they have a strong board behind them. As a board member, ask yourself this question. Have you read your school charter contract? If not, please take time to get your hands on a copy and read it. Or better yet, ask that contract be brought back as an informational item on an upcoming agenda. This way, every member of your board will have access to the contract and it can be read. The contract is everything. The contract is between the board of your school and the SPCSA, and it is shocking how many board members have never even read that contract. So please, if your board hasn't done that yet, that's the first thing you should be writing down on your little to-do list and get it on an upcoming agenda. AB 419, codified as NRS 388A.224, contains 3 requirements. Charter school sponsors must establish governance standards, which we did and which we will review. 2, training regarding those standards must be provided by the charter school sponsor or another organization approved by the charter school sponsor. So you're undergoing that training right now. Each member of the charter school governing board must participate in training regarding the standards before the charter school opens. So that's why we're doing this right now before it opens, and at least every 3 years. Please notice that it says each member of the charter school's governing body. Your whole board, some of you, your whole board is here. Some of you, you're not. That's why we're recording this. It is a requirement of the law that every board member have this training prior to your school opening. The SPCSA has a list of approved trainers on our website. Your board can contract with one of those trainers. You can also access the recordings, like I just said, of this training. Obviously, using the training that we provide is the fastest and most inexpensive way to ensure new board members get this training before their first meeting. So let's just say 9 months from now, you get a new board member. That new board member has to have this training as well. Please reach out to us, get the link, make sure they have had the training. Or if you want to contract with someone else, you're more than welcome to, but again, ours is cheap. All right, let's talk about governance versus compliance. Effective boards balance governance and compliance. Boards should ensure that compliance is part of their governance strategy, but not the sole focus. Of course, the day-to-day responsibilities of compliance are dedicated to the school leader. So how can a board oversee compliance? Ask your school leader, as part of their update items, to include a list of all the reports that were due between board meetings, their due dates, and the date they were turned in. Not only will this allow the board to have some oversight over compliance, but it will also give you a huge appreciation for the amount of reporting required in Nevada. If your school is not meeting standards academically, organizationally, or financially, your board is responsible. Let me say that again. If your school is not meeting standards academically, organizationally, or financially, it is the board that is responsible. While it is true that the leader and staff manage the day-to-day responsibilities of operating the school, if you are missing the mark on any of these measures, you have a responsibility to hold leaders accountable. Ideally, you can work together as a team to improve, but sometimes as a board, you have to make hard decisions regarding the ability of the person tasked with day-to-day operations. If they're not getting the job done, you have to ask yourself, have we selected the right person to lead this organization? Okay, we're going to jump now into the actual governance standards of the SPCSA. These decks are intense. But we are going to take the time to talk about every single one of them because they are important. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the standards. On the right-hand side, you're going to see examples of what it looks like in action. What I want to make very, very clear is what it looks like in action side is not intended to be a comprehensive list of what fulfilling these standards look like. Rather, they are intended to give a few baseline examples, things we have seen high performing boards in our portfolio um, do. Okay. So again, this isn't like a checklist where you go and you're like, yep, we do that, we do that, we do that. Oh, that's it. That's all there is. No, these are just examples, not a comprehensive list. So the first standard is focus on student growth, achievement, and social emotional well-being. The first standard is understanding academic performance expectations established by the state of Nevada and the State Public Charter School Authority. So what it looks like in action. The Nevada School Performance Framework and the academic framework are reviewed annually by your board so you understand what is being measured. It does not do any good to tell your board, we got 3 stars, we got 4 stars, if they don't understand what measures are feeding into that. Another example is the school specific results are shared with the board, right? If you're not even sharing those outcomes with your board, I mean, that is the lowest level of baseline for what that looks like. Next up is commit to the academic, behavioral, social, and emotional success of all enrolled students and the overall academic success of the school. What does that look like in action? It looks like an agenda item on every meeting where you are talking about academics in some way. Every meeting, academics in some way. Next, set ambitious and attainable goals for students' academic growth and achievement that aim to ensure the success of all students. What does that look like in action? It looks like 1 to 3 board members, just not a quorum, are part of your school performance plan committee. Your board should be weighing in on the development and design of that plan. Of course, the plan will ultimately be approved by the entire board, but a board member should be sitting on the actual SPP committee. Next standard under this, or next benchmark under this standard, is establish objectives for student social and emotional well-being that aim to ensure an inclusive, positive, and supportive environment for students. So what does that look like in action? Your board actually looks at the results from the Nevada School Climate Survey. The Nevada School Climate Survey is given to every student. I believe it's 5th grade on up. because your board should take the time to look at those results. Another way you can show that you are fulfilling this standard is your school counselor or social workers are invited to a board meeting to highlight their work. Another way is your counselors use a board-approved SEL curriculum. All right, let's jump to the next standard, which is ensure an effective and well-run organization. So, first up, understand organizational performance expectations established by the State Public Charter School Authority. Because you're new schools, you are, if you haven't already, you will get the OPF, the Organizational Performance Framework training. So, right out the bat, you're going to know that your board has had that training. But going forward, as you get new board members, you need to refresh on this, annually. You need to understand, what are we being measured against. Another way that boards do this, or this standard, is what it looks like in action. The OPF outcomes are reviewed and approved by the board annually. Like, you actually are talking about the organizational performance framework at a board meeting. Next up, uphold the legal and ethical duties of the school's board. Ensure that the board meets all compliance and reporting requirements. What does it look like in action? Although the statute only requires quarterly meetings, a well-run school should meet far more often, especially in its first 5 years. Almost every single month, there are reports due that require board approval. That cannot happen if the board is not meeting regularly. Okay. Additionally, as a new school, if you are only meeting quarterly, not only can you not stay on top of these organizational things, but there are financial things that you need to be tracking far more often than quarterly. Uphold legal requirements for charter schools under state and federal law and regulation and comply with the terms of the contract. What does that look like in action? The board takes seriously complaints regarding special education or other issues regarding state or federal law. Okay? You cannot blow these off. If you get a complaint about the way special ed is being managed, you've got to take it seriously with your school leader and find out what's going on. Next up, regularly monitor operational data and ensure the organizational health of the school, and monitor progress toward the State Public Charter School Authority's organizational performance expectation. Again, I kind of already talked about this, what it looks like in action, but the board gets a report at every meeting of all the reports that were due, their due date and the dates they were submitted. I used to do this as a school leader. Honestly, I started off doing it selfishly because I wanted my board to acknowledge how much work was going on that they weren't aware of, right? Like, I wanted them to see that I had submitted 20 reports in the last month and that was taking up a lot of my time. But it became really important in them just understanding their oversight of that. So I cannot emphasize enough how easy that is to do, and how far it can go with your board and them understanding. Okay, this is a continuation of this standard. Establish and uphold school and board policies that protect the organizations, its students, and employees. What does that look like in action? The board updates applicable policies after each legislative session, right? Lately, the last few sessions, there have been big changes about discipline laws, and everybody has to update those policies, right? But on top of that, the board reviews and updates all policies on a regular schedule. It's not necessarily realistic for you to say we update all of our policies annually. But if you get on a cycle where you're just, every month you're reviewing one or two of them to make sure that they're all still applicable, that they're all, up to date, is very, very helpful. Ensure the school has strong operational plans for facilities, food services, transportation, security, and emergency preparedness. So what does it look like in action? The board approves plans as appropriate in a public meeting. The board approves a drill schedule, and the annual drill log is presented to the board before its June 15th due date, right? Those are things that you're going to get flagged in Epicenter. Hey, your drill log for the year is due. include that as an informational item for your board so they understand. Look at all these drills that we did this year, right? Get that drill schedule approved in advance by your board. That's how you're demonstrating this standard. And the last one is ensure all board meetings are conducted in accordance with Nevada's open meeting law and that the board operates in accordance with the school's bylaws. Again, all active board members should have taken the OML training provided by the SPCSA, and you should be pretty familiar with that by now. The next standard has to do with managing financial resources responsibly. So the first one is understanding financial performance expectations established by the SPCSA. So what does that look like in action? It looks like every board member attended or viewed the training on the financial performance framework. If your board doesn't understand what it is you're being rated against, those short-term and long-term metrics, you're not frankly doing your job to oversee it. You have to understand what we're measuring you against. Annually establish and manage a budget that allocates resources in alignment with the school's goals and strategic plan. What does that look like in action? It looks like your board approving a conservative budget by the legal due date. It looks like the budget has line items that are connected to the school's performance plan. Right? If your school performance plan talks about like updating or purchasing, a supplemental phonics program to support early literacy, but you don't budget for that, then your budget isn't in line with your strategic plan. Next one, regularly review financial data and adjust the school's budget or operations as appropriate. This is a common mistake that we see made. We see schools approve a budget by the due date, their final budget, and then they never amend that budget. There was never, not one time in 13 years of running a school that I did not have to amend my final budget multiple times throughout the year. And I was hitting my enrollment targets. So right out of the bat, if your enrollment targets are not in line with the budget that your board approved, you absolutely positively must approve an amended final budget that matches your real enrollment. Okay, that's just one example. Establish and uphold financial policies and procedures that protect the school's resources. You have to have an approved financial policy manual, and the school leadership has to adhere to those policies. If they don't, they're held accountable. Regularly monitor financial performance to ensure the short and long-term financial health of the school. I cannot reiterate enough how many times we have seen schools not do this and how literally crazy it is. Every single month, you should be reviewing your expenses, your budget to actuals, your cash flow, days cash on hand, all of those things. Every month as a board, you should be looking at that. If you're not, how can you be overseeing your budget, especially in those early years when we know finances are so tight? They are so tight, and it is your board's responsibility. This budget and these millions and millions of taxpayer dollars are your responsibility. If you just pass a budget and you never look at it again, you are not fulfilling your obligations. I mean, that is very, very baseline stuff. The next one is to commit to long-term success. So what does that look like? So what is the first standard, I should say? Oversee the development and implementation of the school's strategic plan, which aims to bring to fruition the school's mission and vision. The board has approved a 5 to 10-year budget projection. The board has long-term academic and enrollment goals. That's what it looks like in action. Next up, understand the state public charter school authority's strategic plan and priorities and work to create alignment. If your board hasn't seen a copy of our most recent strategic plan, that's a great thing to put on an agenda and discuss as a board how you fit in, how your school fits into that. Next up, establish board committees to further the strategic plan and school goals. I'm going to tell you, committees are great. I am 100% an advocate of committees. We implemented committees at my school. I will also tell you that establishing board committees is pretty advanced. It is not something that we typically see in first year schools. So don't put too much pressure on yourself about this one, but maybe it's part of the long-term goal that by year 3 you you are establishing committees, or maybe you set a goal in the second year we're going to have a finance committee, and in the third year we're going to have a finance and a governance committee, and by the fourth year we're going to have a finance, academic, and governance committee. However you do it, know that committees can be incredibly helpful, but it is also, you have to be fairly sophisticated because each one of those committees has to follow open meeting law, and there are rules about how subcommittees work. So don't bite that off before you're ready, because otherwise it can lead to violations of the law. But once you're ready, they can make your board meetings so much more efficient. Next up, regularly assess the board's effectiveness in meeting these governance standards and achieving strategic goals. So, how does it look in action? The board discusses these standards and identifies strengths and next steps for improvement. We try to highlight one of these standards every single time and during our SPCSA board meetings. Next up, engage in meaningful board training conducted by independent individuals or organizations. So the board attends conferences, or maybe, you guys all pick a book on good governance and you all read it. You all read the same book and you discuss that book at a board retreat. We've seen boards do that. We've seen boards attend conferences. Those can be great, great ways to build the capacity of your board. This standard is continued on this page. Maintain and engage board, ensuring compliance with all bylaws and statutory requirements for board members. What does that look like in action? It looks like the board has robust conversations related to items on the agenda during board meetings, right? If you're having a board meeting and not a single board member says anything outside the motion, like, it's probably not great, right? You should be having conversation. The board should review board materials in advance of the board meeting. Now, in order for the board to do their job and review materials in advance, the school staff has to get those materials to them in advance. So, getting into a rhythm where as the staff who is preparing these materials, you got to get it to them. Honestly, if you can get it to them the week so that they have a weekend in between that they can review, it's super helpful. As a board member, if you're not taking time before those board meetings to review that material and you're just coming in cold and you don't know what it is you're voting on, one, you can't participate in any meaningful conversation, and two, frankly, you're just not doing your job. I don't know how else to say it, but plainly like that. Next up, proactively plan for potential board member transitions and ensure effective onboarding for new board members. So what does that look like in action? You're continually collecting resumes for prospective interested new members. I just had a file and I would put prospective board members in my file. The board has a short list. Oops, that should say has instead of as. The board has a short list for potential candidates for required positions, right? Like, you kind of know, like, okay, we know we have to have a lawyer, an accountant, a teacher, an HR expert on this board. Do we have kind of a short list of people who fit those candidates that we could lobby to if we needed to serve on our board? The board has an onboarding process for new members that includes the board handbook, ethics, bylaws, and a link to the SPCSA training for open meeting law, good governance, and the performance frameworks. Please, 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 you guys, get a little onboarding packet together and make sure that these SPCSA trainings are part of it. And then by doing that, you're going to meet your statutory obligations, okay? All right, we're almost done, I promise. Next standard, ensure strong leadership and effective partnerships. So the first standard, hire school leadership that is committed to the school's model and mission and is capable of leading staff and students to achieve strong results and meet goals. What does it look like? It looks like the hiring process is rigorous and complies with NRS. It takes place in a public meeting. Next, commit to uphold the boundary between governing the school and leading the daily school operations. What does that look like in practice? It looks like the board not getting involved in day-to-day operations, but holding the school leader accountable if they don't meet standards, right? And this can be particularly hard for founding board members, you guys right here on this call today, right? You have put your blood, sweat, and tears into this application, into getting this school off the ground, and you have a vision in your head about what that's going to look like. So if we're going to see boards that are getting too involved in trying to micromanage day-to-day operations, it is often these founding boards, because it's understandable. You've put your heart and soul into it, but just remember, that's not your job. Once you've hired that school leader, it's their responsibility. Hold school leadership accountable for the operations and performance of the school, addressing challenges proactively. The board understands that it's their job to hold the school leader accountable and make what can be tough and uncomfortable decisions if the school's goals are not being met. Additionally, it's hard to be proactive if you're not reviewing academics at every meeting, finances at every meeting, and operations at every meeting. You cannot be proactive if you're not reviewing this stuff at every single meeting. Regularly evaluate school leader performance based on established expectations. So again, you're annually evaluating your school leader in a public meeting against the established set of criteria. Proactively plan for the development of future leaders and for succession. The board, and this is just one way that you can do this, the board ensures that a grow your own program is in place in the school. So, that means you've established one or two people that might be on a leadership pipeline, and you start kind of giving them some leadership responsibilities, right? Maybe you have them mentoring teachers. Maybe, they're overseeing the SPED department, things like that, where you're sort of growing them within the organization itself. Next is establish clear, specific contracts with key partners, including EMOs, CMOs, and back office service providers, and set clear expectations for expirations, terminations, performance, and outcomes. So what does that look like in action? It looks like the board approving contracts. It looks like the board chair signing contracts in accordance with statute. It looks like the board regularly reviews and evaluates the performance of vendors and partners, including EMOs and CMOs. Holding partners accountable for their services and performances, addressing challenges proactively. Certainly, that's, kind of the same bullet point as this one. You regularly reviewing and evaluating performance, and you're making the hard decisions. Like, we've seen some of our school boards make the hard decision to let go of a vendor, right? And that's a tough thing. That can be a really tough thing to do, but that is the responsibility of the board. Regularly evaluate partnerships based on established expectations to perform and outcomes. The board approves the annual vendor. I'm sorry, you guys, I should have filled this in and I didn't. So I'll just say that we collect a document at the SPCSA where you kind of sign off on all your vendors and how they're doing. And I can't remember when it was due and I didn't fill it in, and that's on me. But your school leader will know well in advance, and the board should be approving that. They should be signing off and saying, yeah, the custodial company is doing a great job. Yeah, the IT company is doing a great job. Yeah, the payroll service is doing a great job. And the last standard is operate in service of your school community. Ensure that the school's board meetings and its members are accessible to the school community, including parents, teachers, and students. So what can that look like in action? It can look like you emailing out your agenda to all enrolled parents. It can look like providing a way for parents or guardians to participate virtually. The next one is develop and consider school policies and critical decisions transparently and in collaboration with the school community. Um, what does that look like? It can look like having parents on your governance committee, right? That's a great way to ensure that you're doing that. Establish effective communication systems and proactively seek robust input and feedback from the school community. What does that look like in action? Ensure that the board contact information is easy to find on the school website. Nothing is more frustrating than a parent not being able to get hold of a board member, right? And if we get if we get a complaint at the school about that, we will take or at the SPCSA, we will bug you and say, "Hey man, we can't even figure out who's on your board, let alone how to email them," right? Please make sure that it's easy to find on your website. Collaborate with stakeholders to address concerns and challenges. Ensure that parents and other relevant stakeholders are involved in high stakes decisions. That's what that looks like in action. Seek to achieve and maintain board members and school staff that are representative of the school. What does that look like in action? It looks like having a diverse board that represents your student body. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that you might have about any of the SPCSA good governance standards as approved by the authority board. It's okay if you're not, but I'm just going to give a little bit of wait time because I see some of the groups talking. So I want to just make sure and see if that turns into a question or not.
Go for it.
Oh, are we muted there now? Can you hear us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we were just discussing a little bit about the committees. You said that that's typically something you see at a more developed board and not something that we really need to focus on in the first year or two. We were under the understanding that several of those committees were required to be stood up, either by your policy or by state law. Is that not the case?
Look, having some of those committees is very helpful. But again, they all have to follow open meeting law. They
Right.
all have to. So this is what I'll tell you. The first year that I was running a school, right? Like it's normally the school principal working with the board chair. The school principal is doing all the work developing that board agenda and working with the chair to make sure but who's doing the work? Not the board chair generally, in my experience, right? And so sometimes when you are uh just starting out running a school, just getting that one public meeting off the ground, getting all the materials out in advance, getting it posted in a compliance with open meeting law, that's a pretty heavy lift for staff at a new school. If they can manage it and you can be doing more, great, more power to you. But keep in mind that's multiple agendas that have to be created. That's multiple chairs that you're working with. That's a lot of documents that you are prepping and getting ready, right? So let me just give you an example, right? I had finance committee, a governance committee, and an academic committee. And a regularly scheduled board meeting every single month. There's a lot of work that goes into every single one of those. There's a lot of documents that go before every single one of those. There's a lot of backward planning to ensure. So, like, for example, on our board, the school improvement plan, it wouldn't come before the whole board until the academic committee had signed off on it. Our budget would not come before the whole board until the finance committee had signed off on it. No policy would come before the whole board before the governance committee had signed off on it. So when it came to our board meetings, yeah, they went pretty quick because we were like, yeah, the governance committee signed off on this. Great. Yes, the budget committee went through this budget line item by line item, so it's a quicker process in the general public meeting. But again, there's a lot of backwards planning that has to happen to do that and and comply with open meeting law. So, I mean, yeah, it can be done, but it's going to be a heavy lift for a staff who is already dealing with a pretty steep learning curve.
Melissa,
So,
This is Dorothy Steininger.
yeah,
I want to just make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So we as the board thought that the SPCSA required us to have all these committees in our first year. But what I'm hearing you say is that is not necessarily the case. We can establish whatever committee we think may be necessary and then leave the rest till a time when we can manage it, just time wise and everything else. Am I
yeah,
hearing you correct?
yeah, 100%. And if I were you, I would I would start with the finance committee because the
Okay, well,
budget, it's the most complicated, and
Mhm.
it's helpful to have a
Let's
few
go back.
members of your board and then some other people, parents maybe, where you dig in like literally line item by line item. Those people understand that budget so thoroughly. Like that's what I would start with personally. But you might decide like, no, I mean, those are the common committees we see. That doesn't mean you have to do those, right? You might find that something else is more applicable or useful to you, right? You might be like, actually, there's another one we want to add, right? I would just, I would not add a committee until you are effectively running a normal open meeting law meeting. And by effectively doing that, I'm also including the fact that you're getting board materials out in advance for your board to review, right? So if you can't do that for a regularly scheduled board meeting, don't start trying to add in a bunch of committees because you're going to be drowning. Set some
No,
goals like, okay, maybe by the first 6 months we're going to start finance committee. Then next year we're going to add another one, and then the next year another one.
yeah, Melissa, that's really helpful to us because we were confused. And I
Yeah,
mean, we were struggling with that because we thought that was, like you say, a huge, heavy lift.
it is.
But
It is.
we thought you guys required it. So we were scrambling around to figure out how we were going to establish all these committees, how were we going to get the agendas out, how we were going to comply with all the open meeting requirements. So we are really
Yep.
delighted to hear that we can go a little bit backwards and
Yeah.
do this in a reasonable fashion,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
Go slow to go fast, right? Like you got to get a handle on just having a regularly scheduled board meeting and then slowly work your way up. Like these are the standards. You're not going to, it's kind of like the kindergarten standards. You're not expected to know it on the first day of kindergarten. You're expected to know it by the end of kindergarten, right? Your board is not going to be perfect at all of these standards right out of the chute. But if you're constantly striving to stay on top of this stuff and prioritizing what's the most important and building on it, you're just going to get stronger and stronger as a board. And the winner there is the students in your school.
Yeah.
But yeah, please don't even try to start out with that.
Melissa, I have one more question
Yeah.
along that same line, because are we going to be relieved? Oh, yes. Because we were trying to figure out how to manage all that. However, like school performance, it would be, I think I picked up from one of your slides, say 2 of the board members wanted to meet with the principal to kind of drive student performance, look at data and get the presentation ready. That's not something we have to agendize open meeting law. It's more like a support to the
No,
principal.
so actually by the state actually requires that you have a school performance committee. So it's already going to be a requirement of the plan. The plan is already going to say, no, school principal, you don't get to just do this in your office as much as you want to. And as much as it would save you time, that's not how this works, right? You have to have people on your school performance plan committee, teachers, counselors, parents. I can't remember all the requirements. I'm saying have a couple board members on there as well, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to have to approve this plan, and having a few of them on there And that's not a board committee. That's the
Perfect.
school yeah, so that's not an open meeting law thing. That's we're having a school improvement plan meeting. That's just, happens whenever, however. Sometimes you might even have a student on that committee. It just depends. Same with like your emergency management plan, right? Like you're going to have an emergency management plan. That it's a good idea to have a board member sit on that committee, but that's not an open meeting law. That's just a board member participating in another committee that's required that you have.
Thank you. You took so much pressure off us because we've been
Oh my
trying to
gosh,
figure out
I
how to
feel so
manage all this.
happy.
We thought we had to have every single one of those committees, and we were like, how
No.
are we going to pull this off?
No,
This-
you're not.
Thank you.
You're not
Yeah,
your
we're
first
not.
year.
Thank you.
So, Melissa, can you clarify when something is a board committee and when it's not a board committee, but we're working on cool things?
Here, it's so obvious that I can't explain it. I know that doesn't make sense. So like if you're required to have a school improvement plan committee, which you are, that's not a board, that's not the whole board, right? So just do that. You're required to have an emergency management committee. You can put a board member on there as long as it's not a quorum, it's not a board meeting. Or, I mean, it
Melissa,
doesn't require open meeting law.
I think this might help, Brandolyn. There are no required board committees.
Interesting. Okay.
It's best
So-
practice down the road, but it's not
Yeah.
required.
That
If there's
is
a
great news for us.
If
I
there's
mean,
a required committee, it's likely like some staff, some family members, some but it's not, there's no bylaw required board committee, like subcommittee.
So is the differentiation or the key if there's more, if in the meeting there's going to be a quorum of board members, then it becomes open meeting law
Yes.
committee. If
Yes.
if we consistently remain less than a quorum of board members discussing a topic, then we don't have to go open meeting law. Is that the differentiation?
Yep.
Yeah. And as you're going, do not hesitate to reach out and ask. We would rather you reach out and say, hey, do we have to agendize this or not? We'd rather get it right than have someone file an open meeting law complaint against you, because that's just a headache no one has time for. So ask as you're going along. Definitely don't be afraid to ask.
Super. Well, you made our life way easier, so thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy.
I have one more technical question related to that, which is because we thought these committees were required, we wrote them into our bylaws. So if we have them in our bylaws, is there a certain amount of time that they can be not established?
Listen,
or do we need to amend that?
Here's what I would do. At your next board meeting, I would just agendize establishing committee timelines, goals, committee timeline goals. And then you can always circle back to that and go, look, we had a goal of having the financial committee in place, before the net fiscal year 27 budget was approved. We had a goal of, and goals, as we know, can be fluid. Sometimes we hit them, sometimes we don't, but we course correct and we make adjustments based on reality, right? So as long as you are showing forward motion, I think no one's going to call you out on your bylaws, as long as you have a plan to get there eventually.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you.
Casey, did I see that you had a question or no? Okay. Okay, well, I feel like usually all these calls do is stress people out more. So honestly, I feel like it was a major win that we took a load off. Again, don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you guys all for being here. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
so
It's
much.
going to be a much better night.
Yes.
Thank you.